Brazil, a large country in South America, is not typically the epicenter of tropical storms like the Caribbean or North America. However, due to climate change and global weather fluctuations, Brazil has been hit by a number of severe storms and floods in recent decades. One of the most famous storms in Brazil's history was Hurricane Catarina, which occurred in March 2004. It was the first tropical storm ever recorded in the South Atlantic, a rarity. Catarina made landfall in the southern Brazilian state of Santa Catarina, causing severe damage to infrastructure, homes, and crops, as well as numerous casualties. Prior to this, the Brazilian people and government had little experience or preparation for dealing with such extreme weather events. In addition, heavy rains and floods are also common, especially in mountainous and low-lying areas, causing landslides and waterlogging. These weather phenomena often occur in the summer, when the climate becomes hot and humid, and heavy rains can last for days. The states of Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, and Minas Gerais are frequently affected by major floods and landslides, resulting in loss of life and property. Floods have a serious and far-reaching impact on people's lives, especially in areas with poor economic conditions or weak infrastructure. When floods occur, water inundates homes, washes away property, and destroys infrastructure such as roads, bridges, and electricity and water systems. People face homelessness, food and water shortages, and the risk of disease outbreaks due to environmental pollution. Floods also disrupt daily life as many people are forced to move to temporary shelters, while economic activities such as agriculture, trade, and manufacturing are disrupted. People who rely on agricultural land or livestock suffer great economic losses when crops are inundated and livestock die due to floods. In addition to the physical damage, floods also affect people's mental health, causing stress, anxiety, and depression due to loss and uncertainty. Many people face long-term challenges in rebuilding their lives and recovering from disasters, requiring support from governments and aid agencies. Floods also exacerbate social disparities, as vulnerable communities often lack the resources to recover quickly, leading to prolonged poverty. The flood scene was horrifying, as the raging waters swept away everything in its path. Houses, once safe havens, were now eroded and collapsed in the blink of an eye. Walls were shattered, roofs were floating in the murky water. It was no longer possible to distinguish between the streets and the river, as the ground was now submerged in water. Cars, which were our daily means of transportation, were like helpless boats, swept away by the flood without direction. They collided with each other, emitting sharp metallic sounds, while the water continued to surge, pushing them to unknown destinations. The scene of devastation spread, with objects, furniture, and even trees being pushed, smashed, and swept away by the raging water. People's cries for help echoed in the suffocating atmosphere, as everything happened too quickly and too fiercely. The scene of chaos and despair was evident on every street corner, which had previously been peaceful. Floods turned cities and villages into ruins, leaving a haunting horror for those who witnessed it. I never thought I would see such a sight. The streets we used to walk on every day had turned into raging rivers, the water rising up to our knees. Where there used to be streets, there was only a torrent of muddy water. Oh, and the big stadiums, places where cheers once echoed, now looked like giant fish tanks. The water had flooded in, so deep that the edges of the pitch were no longer visible. Everything was submerged underwater. Everywhere, the ground seemed to be groaning. The streets we knew had collapsed, cracking open like the mouths of a deep wound. These cracks stretched on forever, and every time I looked at them, my heart sank, wondering if things would ever be the same again. Everything was falling apart before our eyes, and the feeling of helplessness and horror surrounded us, unable to escape. In the midst of that scene, I could only pray for this terrible thing to end quickly. Standing on the high ground, looking down at the scene before me, I felt my heart tighten. The floodwaters rushed in unstoppable, sweeping away everything in their path. Houses, which had been filled with laughter just this morning, were now mercilessly swept away, shattered into pieces by the fierce force of the water. Cars, once the means of transportation for countless people, were now tossed about in the water like useless toys, knocking against each other with terrifying noises. My eyes followed the remains of the neighborhood. Large tree stumps were uprooted, drifting in the murky water, while the roads were cracked and eroded. A feeling of fear gradually took over me. I heard cries for help in the distance, but all sounds were drowned out by the roar of the rushing water. My heart felt heavy with absolute helplessness. I have lived here for so many years, never seen anything so terrible. But at that moment, I knew that nature can be more cruel and ruthless than anything we can imagine. My heart ached when I thought of the families who had lost everything, even the future that we did not know. There was a dull pain, an indescribable regret, seeing everything around me destroyed in just a moment. Truly, I have never felt so helpless and empty as at that moment, facing the boundless power of nature that humans cannot resist. Before my eyes was a scene of desolation and sorrow. The earth and sky seemed heavy under the thick layer of mud, stretching everywhere I could see. The familiar roads were now just cracked strips of land, mottled by the receding water, leaving behind dark traces and jagged rocks. The once warm houses now had only ruined walls, broken roof tiles lying haphazardly in the middle of the mud. Windows were smashed to pieces. Furniture inside the house was swept away or lying around, submerged in mud, no longer recognizable as their original form. The large trees that had stood firm for years were now uprooted, lying flat like helpless witnesses to the disaster. Some tree trunks were broken in half, bare among the rubble. Dirty water still remained in many places, forming muddy puddles, emitting an unpleasant, fishy smell of decomposition. Everywhere, the scene was left in desolation. Vehicles were overturned, bridges were broken, signs were swept away, lying lifelessly in the midst of the devastation. The air was stifling. The eerie silence was only broken by the random collapse of a weak wall. What was left after the flood was like a gloomy picture of the destruction of nature, where life used to be bustling and full of vitality. My heart sank. I couldn't help but feel small and helpless before the ruthless power of nature.